Welcome. We're excited that you can join us for a lively conversation with our esteemed panel of experts on learning analytics, talking about learning analytics now and in the future. Just a couple of reminders, this is a 45-minute conversation, and I want to encourage you to type your question in the Q&A box. I'm also going to start by polling our audience. We have a diverse audience. We're going to get an idea of what organization everyone is coming from and how you're currently using analytics, if you're using analytics at all. So you should see a series of 3 questions, and if you would be so kind to answer those questions, we can get a better idea of where you are in your journey with analytics. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. My name is Monica Watts. I am the Director of K-12 Engagement for IMS Global. I work with the local education agency members. And Tim, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tim Beekman from Safari Montage, co-founder. We build a learning object repository. I'm also chairman of the IMS board, on the IEEE board, on analytics standards as well, and the Unicorn Tech board.
Great. Leo?
Hi, my name is Leo Brehm, and I'm the senior product manager and co-founder of CatchOn, and have participated with IMS for quite a few years, and most of my career spent as a school CIO in Massachusetts, but most of my career in Sharon and Newton public schools just outside of Boston.
Excellent. Joe?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Brazier. I am Senior Worldwide Business Strategy Manager at Microsoft in their education industry. So very excited to be here. We may or may not use analytics, so happy to get into this conversation with these guys today.
Excellent. Karl? Karl, I think you're on mute.
Somebody had to do it. My name is Karl Rectanus. I was a teacher and administrator here and overseas, but LearnPlatform is my 4th successful education innovation organization. We provide an EdTech effectiveness system that's used by districts, states, and their provider partners. We're excited to be a new trusted apps preferred partner as well, and appreciate the chance to join you, Monica, and the rest of the team here.
Excellent, thanks. And we appreciate that partnership, Karl. So we have some results from our poll, and it looks like we have about 30% K-12 attendees and about 50% supplier. We have about 15 from professional organization, and currently using analytics, 100%. So that's great. And we have about 43 to 43% using analytics at an intermediate or sophisticated level. So that's wonderful information for our panelists. So let's go ahead and get the conversation started. Let me start at the beginning. I'm going to start with Leo. And Leo, how would you define learning analytics?
Learning analytics, Monica, throughout my career, we've been trying to be purposeful about using analytics in education. And in that learning process over the last 12 years or so, I would say that, learning analytics are those analytics that can be used just in time in the classroom to allow teachers to adjust or make adjust their curriculum or the delivery to reach learners where they are. So learning analytics can feed into big data and it can help make strategic decisions. But the term about learning analytics is definitely focused on improving teaching and learning as quickly as possible. So that's why when we talk about state tests and state exams and the results of those and creating action items out of those, it's not very helpful, right? And districts try to use things like benchmark assessments to do that, but they have to be extremely organized to do that. Those benchmark assessments help, find gaps, but those are only given, quarterly or every trimester or so. So the next level of that is having effective analytics with standard assessment and usage data that allows teachers and support people to meet students where they are and where they're struggling and provide those structures that are needed. So, and that's where learning analytics comes into the education market.
Excellent, thank you. Karl, what are some of the uses of learning analytics that you've seen being applied within school districts?
it's a good question. I don't think there's any doubt that over the last 5 to 10 years, the use of learning analytics has exploded. When when we started LearnPlatform in 2014, really the overwhelming question in schools and districts was, should we ed tech? You all remember the time that was like an argument over, are we going to use textbooks or should we have devices? Those types of things. And I think what I've really appreciated across the entire market is a very rapid evolution that's occurring, especially with advanced school districts, states, and providers, to evolve what analytics has really meant counting things, right? A lot of people talk about analytics and they're really just talking about counting things, counting logins, counting visits, counting number of X or Y. And certainly LearnPlatform releases something called the EdTech Top 40 that is based on actual student engagement across millions of students and teachers to understand what does engagement look like and where is it expanding. And that information, along with really deep analytical machine learning and other things, are leading us not only to realize that engagement is a leading indicator of learning, but it's also a pathway to using analytics and information towards evidence building. And really, as we evolve what's going on in the market, we're seeing things like rapid cycle evaluation and deeper evidence building rather than just counting things. We're very excited about where that goes from here as we continue to talk.
Excellent. Tim or Joe, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I got a lot to add to that. I think, to get to Leo's point, there's a lot of different analytics. There's analytics that associate just to counting numbers, which Karl brought up. Analytics that serve real-time need, real-time purpose, real-time outcomes. And there's analytics that are customized and facilitated by the student, the parent, or the classroom. And those analytics sometimes, hopefully, are going to start going back to the teacher. It's not just about the student's progress and the teacher knowing where the student is. It's also about the teacher knowing analytics of how the student's performing and what else they need to do. Not only what per se object or lesson they perform well in, but rigor and taking them to areas they're uncomfortable. So I look at analytics as something that's advancing and moving at a rate that we're going to start to see integrations that are much broader and much more different than, I order something on Amazon and then 2 weeks later it sends me the latest version of that. In education, analytics are different. We need to make our children or our children do things that are comfortable and things that aren't comfortable. So as well as school districts are getting localized. So analytics are going to start to have this human factor of community, I see over the next few years as well, Monica.
Yeah. If I can continue to add on to this, because these are all great points. There's the other aspect of the access to the analytics, the access to the data, and what that does. And Karl, I think somebody mentioned, hopefully this gets back to the teacher so that they can make data-driven decisions. Those are important things that we want them to do. And it makes me think of technology tends to advance to the point to where it becomes much more simple and easy to use. The example that comes to mind is my 93-year-old grandmother. For the sake of her safety, we put smart speakers in her house. She still lives on her own, but nearby, and she can call anybody just by calling out to the speaker. But the other thing that she loved is that she's able to use it as a radio, right? Being 93 and able to name the type of music that she wants to listen to. And first thing she goes is, how about some bluegrass? And it played bluegrass. And she says it took her back 40, 50 years to when she was younger and listening to the radio, one of the things that she loves to do. This connects to me for analytics because data is like the core piece of what teachers do and need. My background is special education, so data is key for student success. teachers hold a lot of information in their heads. They hold a lot in there from this student, that student, but analytics allows it to go to a much larger scale and to really personalize everything for each individual student without a huge amount of lift and turnover from the teacher. So you're able to get all that information in an easy, accessible visualization tool, application, whatever that is, so that you can very easily make decisions off of it. I enjoyed working with data, so it was easy for me, but I knew a lot of my counterparts and coworkers were not comfortable with data because, as I think it was, I'm forgetting who said it, analytics was always seen as numbers and counting. So what does numbers and counting have to do with student behavior, classroom management, building literacy? What does it have to do with that? But it actually does. It helps with student engagement. It helps with helping students from falling through the cracks. It builds a lot of social emotional well-being because students can get better connected to their educators, and the educators can feel better connected to their students, whether it's an elementary school teacher with 30 kids in their class, which is a lot, or if it's a middle school or secondary teacher with kids just pumping through their class all day, to be able to pick out and find those that need the help, who need the expertise and the connection of that educator much quicker. So the access to that data in real time is what really benefits the personalization of that learning and those outcomes we strive for our students.
Excellent.
Monica, if I could just expand on that too, I think that this is absolutely, he's hit the nail right on the head, right? We've had a lot of analytics in education for many, many years. And, I brushed on it, the actual teacher's use of it is actually, very, very low. Special education gets more advanced on it because of the specialized nature of what they do. And, Tim and I have had numerous conversations about that, about the work we did in Newton around trying to make meaning out of the assessment and get that information back to, back to educators. But you hit the nail on the head about the simplistic use of the data. I think that is the key part that falls on us in the ed tech industry as providers, and being able to wade through the quagmire of data that's available in school districts. Most districts don't understand what's available to them and even how to use it. And that's where that term, it's just a bunch of numbers, is relying on us to stop making inference to exactly what Tim was talking about, right? Leveraging the analytics and the AI and machine learning engines to infer what could be next, and relying on the teachers to take that data and that inference and make it more powerful for the students in learning. And so that's what we're doing. We're extremely focused right out of the gate at CatchOn on that. We've always had that as our primary goal, is to bring that type of experience to teaching and learning. And the partners and stuff, obviously through IMS, and the people in this room are all heavily focused on it. But I feel like we still have quite a delta to cover in order to get there for teaching and learning, so that, it's not just those advanced districts with lots of budgets to do it, but it's a turnkey type of solution that, is a little bit better than the Amazon experience, if you will. Because I don't play squash, but because I bought a squash racket once, it keeps asking me if I want a new racket. So, we got to get it. We got to get it better than the Amazon experience.
Yeah. Well, and Leo, that brings me to a question, and I don't want to use the word challenge, perhaps, or hurdle, but maybe opportunity for improvement. And Tim, I'll direct this to you. What are some of the opportunities for improvement, that are for our districts and schools in adopting learning analytics from the top stakeholders to the teacher in the classroom?
Yeah, Monica, I'm going to answer that a couple ways, because I want to add to Leo's before I answer. I think improvement also depends on technology, right? And standards, not to be an IMS conference pushing standards, but the reality of that is that without standards that facilitate where we need to go, we can't get any of this analytic data. Number two, I would say in the last 3 years, things like what Karl's doing with cloud services have allowed the back end to be efficient enough to give us some of this data in real time. I think the reality we need to realize is technically 4 or 5 years ago, the processing of doing 20 gigs of data retrieval in real time was not really possible. And so that has opened up the technology backdoor. The only ways I bring that up is because some of the holdback here wasn't what schools wanted to do. What was possible with the technology that could achieve it. Now, to answer your question in more detail, I think that what we're going to see is, I think analytics are at a point of 1 in development, and some people would argue with that, but I think if on 1 to 10 we're at a 1. You know, we haven't localized analytics to support a particular district unless they build it themselves, which is just the wrong thing to do. We haven't looked at the ability of those standards interfacing with all existing systems within the environment, and external involvement with parent and those type of analytics, for fall back on what Leo said about real-time learning for students and teachers and feedbacks to teachers on student. I think those are the areas, you know, when we, in Safari, every customer would look at 10 years ago, how many plays do I have? It drove me crazy, because play means nothing. The rigor of that particular object, the outcome of how that improves their instructions. You could have one object played 100 times for 100 students that was more effective than something paid 10,000 times. So I think we're going to start to take those analytics for more tighter facilitating of data that we need, not just for the district to have or just for the teacher to have, but maybe the educational community. COVID has reinforced that to some point, but I see this technology back in that's now able to support it with all these IMS standards. I look at the IEEE FML standards, the ARLM, artificial intelligence standards that are going to interface to Caliber and things like that. And the doors are opening now. Just educating where we are and getting people up to speed with that is going to make, I'm going to call community analytics versus the traditional, here's my numbers.
Tim, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we have a situation where we have situations of excellence, but need to go to systems of achievement, right? You know, with LearnPlatform, we've got districts serving 5 million or more students across the country who are rapidly running rapid cycle evaluations using our impact technology. For those not familiar, this is really designed, integrates usage, student achievement, educator experience, cost into, and based on that information runs a correlative, comparative, or control-based analysis to understand fidelity of use and resulting effects on any metric that they want, whether that's a summative or benchmark assessment, attendance, SEL, you name it. And I'll boil that down. One example, IMS member, you know, mid-year, before the end of the first semester, wanted to analyze their mathematics interventions. And when they ran impact analyses, they found that they were having an outsized positive effect for their English language learners in a couple different grades. But they weren't having the same resulting effects for their highest achieving students with that particular intervention. And they ran this over the holiday break. And when they came back, they'd run it a couple times. They'd done this in a few hours. And Tim, to your point, this is the equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of third-party evaluation hours run in a couple hours. And when they came back, they switched their professional learning and where they were implementing that intervention for the second semester. They changed the number of licenses that they were purchasing. And they talked to their provider, and the provider was ecstatic, who actually ended up writing case studies because they were driving the needle, they were moving the needle for English language learners in a way that they had never been able to see, because our student data privacy and other laws make it quite difficult to do valid research. This is happening. So our districts have run over 1,000 rapid cycle evaluations, the equivalent of over $30 million in third-party evaluation. And it's happening within districts all over the country. But imagine a scenario where those could happen. The opportunity is to connect the dots so that that can happen in a more automated way for all providers and all interventions, in a way that can happen so that that particular district can share it with districts like them, so that not every district is having to define this on their own. So we need rapid research and development infrastructure that really connects the entire market, whether those are school districts to their states, but also with the providers. And I think standards bodies, to your point, are really critical because if we're constantly doing English to English to English translation, we're never going to get there.
Right. Thank you, Karl. I have a question from an attendee. Many educators can look at the data and understand when a student did not master the content and needs remediation. They struggle with how to remediate because they already use their best ideas. How do we address that?
And that's exactly where the Amazon Edu experience can start making that difference. And I'll have to take a nod to the Safari folks and the work they've done in that space that I've been tracking for a number of years on caliper analytics and being able to, with simple integrations with assessment management tools where you can use basic state standards that are aligned to assessment objects. When you see outcomes come out of an assessment, even like on a random formative assessment that's happening, and in the moment be able to look up content in your learning object repository that happens to align with that concept to help you either reinforce as a learner, or reteach and reinforce as a teacher, or even guide as a parent, and you make that accessible to them. That is where you have some true reactive in the moment use of learning analytics in its simplistic form, right? Even just state standard alignment to a curated repository of resources, and things like, usage analytics. Yeah, that can be helpful. And too, like maybe those start getting reordered with frequency of use in those searches and those returns and those queries. But at the same time, we can do better than that with the metadata that we gather. And as we grow as an industry around that, we can use things like learning styles and reading levels and lexile levels that are aligned to those same objects. That metadata and that metadata collection and curation is extremely important. It is one of the main reasons why OER never took off the way it could, is because we didn't tag it well enough. We had an onslaught. Educators felt drowned in content. When I was working with educators on digitizing their curriculum, they were drowning in content, not even just tools like CatchOn, tracks the use of, when that's one of the reasons why we're driving to its content level analytics, and because we're going to be able to drive that metadata usage. And so sorry to plug you, Tim, and probably take the steam out of you, the wind out of your sails on that one, but how passionate I am about this. That is the real use of, to say, yeah, we can't expect educators to come up with everything. And back to Karl's point too, the data privacy piece is definitely starting to put a leash on some of the innovation that can happen as well, right? That's one of the things we at CatchOn are trying to do, is we're trying to help them balance the innovation with compliance, but bringing that data to teachers in a meaningful way is going to help that. And like I said, and back to Tim and Karl's point, that standard adoption across the industry is going to allow us to get there faster. And we really do need all vendors at the table to play ball with each other and be cooperative in order for that to happen.
I love that. And one of the things that you mentioned is the other data points, the other ways, that other pieces of information that come from it. A student not achieving mastery, formative assessments, those are all well and good, but what are the other bits of data that we get? Information from parents, this, that, or the other. And that's why it's really important, as you said it towards the end, for all those pieces of information to work together, to get all of those disparate data sources into a common data source, into one piece. Even if you look at the way that pre-pandemic, probably before a lot of schools were adopting analytics, how they tried to enforce behavior between the electives and the chosen classes and the quote unquote academic classes, and saying, hey, if a student has this many number of behaviors, then they're going to get a referral. But if those two departments, those two sides of the physical building are not communicating with each other, then those kids fall through the cracks. The supports don't happen at the time that they need to happen. So if you're able to get all that information and put it under the same umbrella and look at it with all the number of queries and things that you need to get the analytics in the real time to the teachers to make the decisions they need to make in the moment, then you provide the supports that are needed. Leo also mentioned that there's leashes being put on the advancements and innovation in technology right now. And there's, over the last couple of years, there's been paradigm shifting technology has been put in front of teachers, admins, students, families has been placed out there. It's out there, right? The devices, the capabilities, the software, the potential for the analytics is there. But what we need to make sure we also do, we have this opportunity to continue to train and support and provide the PD for the educators, for the admins to learn and get comfortable with it. Because we need to build that familiarity with the use of data and make sure that our policies catch up to where technology has pushed everything to, that we can't run into these barriers of, well, our policy says we can't do that. We need to look into this. And it's like, actually, it's a time to really relook at how schools have been set up and how they need to kind of be refreshed and remodeled for the way things are going in the future. The paradigm shift has to be holistic. It can't be part of it. We can't just throw devices at students. We can't just throw apps at teachers. We can't just put analytics in front of leaders. We need to do it all in conjunction together in order to push everything to where it needs to be. And so I want to make sure that we leave space and time for a lot of other people to talk and everything. But this idea of getting the data and everything to work together to simplify the usage of it, it comes down to those tools being able to ask those right questions. And one of the things that at Microsoft we really try to do is not tell people how to teach. We do believe that the teachers and the leaders can come up with those things. But one of the things that's helped me in the past and that we're trying to do is to surface questions and say, hey, we found all this data. Is this something that is important to you? More so than the Amazon model, as you referred to, Leo, of you bought a racket once, do you want another racket? It's, hey, this student has not started their assignment yet. And, as an educator, I might be like, hey, usually my top students, this one, they didn't turn their assignment in. That's after the fact. That's after when the analytics can come in and help, where you could be able to say, hey, this student hasn't started it yet. And you're like, they're usually on top of things. Let me check in and see what's going on. And that check-in with the student, whether it's 30 in a class or 150 during the day, you're able to make a connection and let that student know that they are seen and supported. And when they're seen and supported, they make that connection with the adults in education. And we know that there is an increased likelihood of long-term success when a student feels connected and supported by their educators. That's one of the just small, simple things that analytics can do to really help students, that we want to make sure that we help to innovate it and push it forward together in the right way.
Joe, I'd love to add on to your point about really, and to Monica, the scope of this opportunity. Our team has analyzed billions of data points and billions of student engagements in a safe and secure way, identified that, during the 2021 school year, school districts on average accessed over 1,400 different ed tech tools every month. Every school district in the U.S. That is a challenge when you say, hey, we should have all the data in a single place. It probably is not realistic to do all of those things, but there is a way, especially if you think about the fact that learning management systems, even our largest and most interoperable, may integrate with 200 to 300 ed tech tools. That means over 1,000 different products are being engaged with in every single school district. But most importantly, and so having a way to communicate and have engagement information and then drill deeper into what that means for those students is really critical. And it's not going to happen without a community or an ecosystem approach. I'm actually doing a lightning talk later on effective ecosystems. But most importantly, that I think is really critical that we point out is that is not a monolith. Ed tech equity is not, there is a huge digital learning equity gap. One of our team's proudest parts of sort of analytics has been visualizing the digital learning equity gap every day at the National Ed Tech Equity Dashboard. It's visible for free. You can link to it from our system. And it looks at ed tech engagement for all students across our network using our free technology. It also breaks that down by districts with high free and reduced lunch, high affluence, that is low free and reduced lunch compared to others. And it also looks at ed tech engagement over the last 6 months for districts based on demographic breakdown. And it is absolutely clear that there is a digital learning equity gap. We are leaving a lot of students behind, especially those that are traditionally underserved or minority, non-white students. And the point of us publishing that was primarily to show that analytics can be information to help us shine a light on what needs to happen and give us visibility to if we as individuals or district leaders or as a nation are moving forward to address what is, I think, one of the key challenges for us as we look to our new normal and hopefully don't go back to our old normal.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Karl. Appreciate that. And I want to focus on something you were saying, and Joe as well. We've shifting the focus a little from the conversation around local education agencies to entire state and the data that we can glean from the state level. I know that some of your organizations are working at that level. So Tim, I'd like to start with you, talk a little bit about that initiative and what data that we can derive from statewide implementations.
Well, if I look at South Carolina or look at some of the statewide pieces that we're doing, obviously you've got a variety of different standards integrations. And so to get to kind of Karl's point and everybody else's point, we're getting lots of data. That data comes from the student to the school, to the district, to the state, and vice versa. Data and processes of what the state needs to develop for content comes a lot from what's being sought at from the student up or the district down. I think the effectiveness of analytics to improve administrative performance at a statewide level, to really see the scope of what Karl was saying, of what a state is doing and providing and doing improved instructional resources digitally to them, is what we're seeing at a state level. And that's very immature, Monica. It's not like it's beautiful and the sun's shining and it's a little rainy because it's just immature yet. But then you start looking at EdFi integration for that, IEEE integration for that, Caliber integration for that, state SISs and the integration there. There's just a ton of work. I mean, it's exciting work, but there's a ton of work to complete that strategy. I think we're headed that way. And the effectiveness of analytics we've mostly talked about today has been about the student, but the effectiveness of helping administrators at a district level or a state level or a school level to fundamentally function better into what they need to do next is also a big piece, which ends up improving the student and the community involvement. So yeah, we see a lot of the requests coming in the model from a statewide level of how can we step to the next level of building exactly what we have deficiencies in our state. And how can we do that quickly, which was, Joe's and Leo and Karl's point, quickly. It's not, we're failing. It's,
yeah, Monica.
Yes.
Yeah, Monica, the state level, I had the opportunity, during the pandemic to work with the State Department of Massachusetts. And then more recently, CatchOn has been working with 3 other state agencies that I can't speak to yet. But the number one problem that always bubbles up, particularly in some of those states that have really small districts, right? Illinois, Massachusetts, Ohio, where the local control is there. The data that gets reported is, I don't want to use the term anecdotal, but it's someone reporting it, into a system, and it's periodic, right? It's could be coming out of the SIS system, but it's being reported in on devices, and they're guessing usage. And one of the struggles we had during the pandemic was they, especially here in Massachusetts, they really didn't know what the gap was in all the school districts, and they were relying on surveys to go back to districts last minute to try to figure out what it was, they were going to try to help them achieve to get through the school year last year. And moving forward, the other realization was the state couldn't, we saw across all of CatchOn's districts, we saw an average of 40% of loss from when the pandemic started to that summer of high school students disappearing. right? Falling off the grid. Absolute panic set in with some of those state agencies as a result. And we were able to help them try to track that engagement and those showing up on an hourly to hourly basis in order to get those reports back to find those students falling through the cracks. Bubbling that up to the state, so the state knows where they need to supply, extra support and scaffold what's happening at district level is imperative. And that, like Tim was saying, not just from an instructional basis, but like go right back to what Karl was saying about just resource level, right? The ability to use those resources effectively and get them provided. And what we're finding is that's really important in the state level, and even larger importance is on regional service agencies. Regional service agencies being able to represent the state at the more local level, so it's not so far up the chain, right? The one thing I saw is, the decision-making process, on anything at the state agency level, even as something as putting out a memo about buying Chromebooks, took weeks in about 7 lawyers. And as simple as just finding the supply, right? We're going to get you some Chromebooks, and we know you need them. So really, really struggling. So this kind of system, this kind of analytics and the help of getting, again, more accurate real time as possible is going to be extremely helpful to folks. Sorry, Karl.
No, I was just going to add on that, the market is there's actually some pretty significant market drivers here too that we're seeing play out. LearnPlatform is used by about half a dozen different statewide. I'll call out 2 that I think are pretty important, because I can't go talk about all of them, but the state of Utah has implemented LearnPlatform across at the state level, and most of the districts, about 90% of the students are covered there. While most districts and states saw between a 5 and 7% loss of engagement, student loss during the period, Utah transitioned post-COVID in 2 days to hybrid statewide. In part because they could communicate what should be happening consistently to parents, families, teachers, educators, administrators through the system. But more importantly, if you fast forward 7 months, compared to 7 or 8% student loss, 700 students statewide is what they were down 700 students. That's 0.07%. And at the end of the day, for districts and for states, that I was a CFO for schools. Our student attrition is a challenge, as big a challenge as teacher attrition is going to be. There's some real market drivers. I'm really excited about what's happening in Texas, where you've got 1,100 districts, but the state has announced that they're providing capacity building, training, and support and systems to do performance measurement across their ed tech ecosystems. And we're excited to be embarking on that work with them, but acknowledging that not every district is the same, that we are not going, a district of a few hundred or a few thousand students compared to districts of all sizes, the top 15 and 25, as well, different needs. But again, building that capacity is going to be required and the whole organization, not just the CTO, I think is recognizing that need because it's financially required.
Great. So we have a question from an attendee, a football question here. Alabama football coach Nick Saban could teach others his methods, but there is an intangible that makes him so successful. That happens with educators as well. How can data address the intangibles? And I'll address that to Joe, since you spoke to some of that.
The intangibles, man. And a sports analogy at that. I love it. So, you know what? When it comes to this, the intangibles are those things where it's like it's that vibe. I don't quite know. And I think part of the way that data can really address it, and it's come up, I think, between Karl and Leo, is the communication of the community aspect of data. I can look at something and I can be like, this is what it's telling me, and I can share it with someone else, and they may say something different. They may see something different, right? And the thing is, what Saban's able to do is get everybody on the same page, get everybody to kind of be like, hey, this is the system, this is how we're going to win. You need to buy in, you need to come and see what we're going to do, and we are going to have success. And he proved it, and he continues to prove it. And that's why everybody loves and hates Alabama so much. But this is the thing, it's getting on the same page. And I spoke to it briefly on that paradigm shift, and people have talked about building capacity. It's not just the thing, it's not just the analytics. We can do all the technology that we need, but we need to get the heads around it. We need to get the policies around it. We need everybody to not just buy in and be like, fine, I'll do it, but to say, hey, this is effective and I want to do this. I want to do what you're doing. And it works on large scales, it works on small scales, right? It comes down to, how do I effectively use this data, and what am I going to accomplish with it? And what he's able to do, those intangibles, is the being able to get everybody to see the vision. And it's that clean vision. That clean vision, it impacts the policies that you put in place. It impacts the training decisions that you make. It impacts the ways that you implement what you have invested in. And somebody mentioned it earlier, it might have been Karl, where people were looking at something one way and they looked at it and they decided to do it a different way. It's that buy-in, it was that shift of, hey, this is, maybe we should consider doing this thing. And that's where we go. And that's where they saw the success. It's not from being decisive and making that decision first and early. It may or may not be the right or wrong one, but analytics allows us to see, reflect, look at the information and make those changes on the fly to have the impacts that we're looking for. Because as educators, we're not sold on the path, we're sold on the destination. We are trying to get our students to a successful life after college, career, whatever they're going to do. We're trying to get them to a successful way to go that direction, right? We're looking long-term. If you're only focused on the short term, you're not going to do that, right? And so taking it back to this football analogy, kids come in from high schools, they're the top in their class, and they're hot shots, and they get put into the system, and it's like, that might have helped you back then, but it's not going to help you succeed here or in the future. And that's where we've got to make sure we bring education in and say, hey, this may have worked in the past. This might have been how we've done it. You may love the way that you've done it for the last 20 years, but things have changed. There's been a metamorphosis. We are now a beautiful butterfly. You can't go back into the chrysalis. It is time to go fly and do something moving forward.
Joe, that's exactly right. And I think the one thing about that sports analogy, that one thing that Nick Saban is, and that is an effective leader, right? And one of the things that we are definitely seeing a vacuum of is leadership in education today. There's been, a flight out of education, some of the pandemic, some of it from retirement, and with that comes, institutional knowledge and and mentoring, right? The impact of good mentoring on building out a good school culture. And education, the technology or ed tech can only be as good as the effective use of it, and that effective use is going to come through leadership and mentoring. And so you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to address on, and that was about the communication, the internal communication of that scaffold the student, around the team of teachers that all have that same student and are able to communicate effectively about them. Particularly, we see it in special education, but one of the things I see as a vacuum in education today, we have LMSs that focus primarily on teachers and students, and we have student information systems that kind of collect that as a basket. But one of the areas is that learning community management system. I happen to sit on school board in my town. And one of the things that killed us during the pandemic was the communication chains. All right, we had to communicate in a cajillion different ways to make sure we got the entire parent community as a whole, including the student community. So one of the things I've been searching for, and I've only seen one really good one out there in the market, is a learning community communication system that kind of takes the LMS and jumps that up to that next level. And with that, our analytics applied there, when you start housing that in the kind of in an area where you're bringing in the information from, the CatchOns and the Learns and the Safari montages, and you're using communication to boot, and you have a trusted spot for that communication, you can start using analytics to provide that culture building and that community building, supported by a strong ed tech foundation, to be modernized. So, our devices here become a part of it, and it becomes that part of the fabric of what we're doing every day. We're going to the same spot. The data is being brought to you. You don't have to go somewhere else.
Excellent. Thank you, Leo. So we're at our time. I want a big thank you to our panelists. I know I learned from you all, and I want to applaud you on the work that you're doing in this area. And we're excited to see what the future will bring. Your contact information is on the screen. I encourage you to contact each of them if you have additional questions. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.
Mike.
Nice to see you all.
Thanks, everybody.